I mean, human beings have the hardware to map distant galaxies with, like, astonishing precision, right? We can engineer life-saving vaccines and literally split the atom.
Oh, for sure. The processing power is incredible.
It is. Yet those exact same highly evolved creatures will log onto the internet and spend 6 straight hours furiously arguing with a total stranger because someone used the wrong version of their in a comment section.
Yep. Happens every day.
Why does our evolutionary software just, crash so spectacularly when we're confronted with a minor disagreement?
Well, it's because we possess this massive, unprecedented cognitive power, but most of the time we're running it without any internal safety protocols.
Right.
When you look at human psychology through that lens, we've essentially built an unregulated particle accelerator inside our own heads, and we're just letting the elements collide.
And navigating that internal collision course is our exact mission for today's deep dive. We are unpacking this really extraordinary piece of satirical yet deeply metaphysical philosophy from the Perspectives by Spectrix series.
It's a fantastic read.
It really is. Specifically, we're looking at an installment titled Beware of the Subs, Morons versus Muons, authored by Dr. Carlton Johnson, who's often referred to in the text as Doc C.
Right.
We're going to map out the invisible subatomic-style forces that are shaping your daily reactions, your biases, and, well, your baseline state of consciousness right this very second.
But before we plunge into the mechanics of this, I mean, we really need to draw a hard line on the terminology to avoid any immediate misunderstandings.
Oh, definitely. The title is a bit provocative.
Exactly. The text uses the word moron, but Doc C makes it explicitly clear that this has absolutely zero to do with intelligence, IQ, or, educational background. We are not calling anyone stupid here.
No, not at all.
We are analyzing a very specific state of being. It's a density of psychological energy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have the moron state on one end of the spectrum and the muon state on the other. The text defines the moron state as unconscious acceleration. So how does a real-world physics concept end up as a metaphor for human psychology? Like, what is mechanically happening in the human mind when it enters that state?
What's fascinating here is that you can think of it as a complete fusion of identity and certainty, entirely stripped of curiosity.
Stripped of curiosity. Wow.
Yeah, unconscious acceleration happens in that microscopic fraction of a second when your emotional response just completely outruns your conscious awareness.
Like when someone cuts you off and you're instantly furious.
Exactly. The nervous system fires, the ego feels a structural threat, and before the higher reasoning centers of your prefrontal cortex can even process the event, you're already lashing out.
You're just reacting.
Right. It's a state where your entire sense of self becomes completely dependent on being right. There's literally no room for new data to enter because the psychological shields are up.
So if the moron state is this chaotic, high-velocity particle collision where you're just blindly smashing into stressors and generating reactive heat, what happens when we look at the other extreme?
The muon state.
Right. Because in literal, real-world physics, a muon is a real subatomic particle. It's invisible, it travels at nearly the speed of light, and it's constantly showering down from the atmosphere, passing right through solid matter.
Passing right through us, actually.
Which, out of context, sounds like a terrifying sci-fi medical emergency.
It does sound like a microscopic invasion, honestly.
Right.
But Doc C takes this physical reality and pivots it into this brilliant psychological metaphor.
I love how he does that.
In the realm of consciousness, the muon represents the antidote to that heavy reactive density. Psychologically speaking, a muonic state is one of subtle insight and deep coherence.
Coherence.
Yeah, it represents the quiet pause between a stimulus and your response to it.
They are these tiny, almost imperceptible moments of penetration. Like a muon could be a single sentence you read in a book that instantly reframes a decade of anxiety, right?
Exactly. Or a quiet realization you have while folding the laundry that you owe someone an apology.
Or simply a sudden deep breath before you hit send on a really angry email.
Yes. Those are tiny particles of awareness that pass cleanly through the rigid, concrete structure of your ego and fundamentally shift your baseline.
So if the moron state is like driving down a bumpy road on completely reactive autopilot, just bouncing off every single pothole, the muon state is like suddenly realizing you have a steering wheel and a brake pedal.
That is exactly it. And that realization, that shift in perspective, is what the Spectrix text defines as coherence.
That's a great word for it.
Coherence is a phenomenal term. I mean, in physics, coherence refers to waves that maintain a constant phase relationship. They move together perfectly. In psychology, Doc C uses it to describe the perfect alignment of your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior, and your core identity.
So when you are coherent, you aren't reacting to the environment anymore.
No, you're responding to it with intention.
Once you grasp this fundamental difference between the reactive collision and coherent awareness, you start to see that human behavior isn't just a random, messy blob of emotions.
Right, it has structure.
It's actually composed of highly specific, observable elements. Which brings us to what might be the most entertaining and honestly insightful section of the source material, Doc C's unofficial periodic table of the soul.
The psychological satire here is incredibly sharp. He categorizes these invisible forces with clinical precision. If our consciousness is the particle accelerator, we need to identify the exact particles colliding inside us on a daily basis.
Let's go through them.
The text starts this breakdown with the egoton.
The egoton. Highly unstable and notoriously volatile. This is the particle that reacts aggressively to any form of criticism or perceived slight.
We've all felt it.
Oh, absolutely. If you've ever felt that hot, prickly flash of defensiveness in your chest when a colleague gives you a perfectly reasonable piece of constructive feedback, you've just experienced an egoton detonating in your nervous system.
It literally interprets data as a weapon. Moving down the table, we encounter the Emotron.
The Emotron.
This particle functions through emotional osmosis. It essentially disables the semi-permeable membrane of your personal boundaries, allowing it to instantly absorb the surrounding emotional weather of whatever environment you're in.
Which is fascinating because it explains so much of our modern digital exhaustion.
It really does.
Like you can open a social media app feeling perfectly content, and 3 minutes later, your heart rate is elevated and you are furious about an event happening 3,000 miles away.
Yep. The Emotron lets the ambient anxiety of a digital thread flood your nervous system before your higher reasoning can build a dam to stop it.
Then we have the Authentron.
The Authentrons. This particle is remarkably rare in high concentrations, but it is incredibly powerful because it remains completely stable under immense pressure.
It's like the anchor.
Exactly. The Authentron doesn't need to perform, it doesn't need to dominate the room, and it doesn't need to react to the egotons bouncing around it. It just calmly holds its ground, radiating this quiet, grounded gravity.
But constantly competing with the Authentron for dominance is the Dramaton.
Oh, the Dramaton.
The Dramaton possesses the unique, almost magical ability to transform a remarkably minor inconvenience into a sweeping Greek tragedy within seconds.
It's wild to watch.
It takes a slightly delayed coffee order or a traffic jam and spins it into a grand narrative about how the universe is fundamentally against you.
And the underlying mechanism of the Dramaton is that it creates artificial friction. And it does this because friction feels like importance.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Right. When your life lacks genuine meaning, the Dramaton manufactures chaos to give you a sense of narrative stakes. It convinces you that your immediate discomfort is the absolute center of the universe.
I mean, we all have a few colleagues or family members operating with a heavy surplus of Dramatons.
We certainly do. And rounding out this chaotic mix is the namesake itself, the Moron particle.
The Moron particle.
This is the particle of unearned certainty. It is deeply, unshakably convinced that it understands the absolute totality of a complex geopolitical conflict or a nuanced scientific theory after reading exactly one sensationalized headline and skimming 2 comments.
It's so common right now.
Because the Moron particle thrives on the fact that nuance requires energy. Analyzing multiple perspectives, holding conflicting ideas, questioning your own biases, all of that burns immense cognitive calories.
So certainty is just an evolutionary energy-saving mechanism.
Exactly. It's a cognitive shortcut. It might have kept our ancestors alive when making split-second decisions on the savannah, but it makes us utterly unbearable when debating public policy in a comment section.
Which brings us to the muonic state. The text places this apart from the other particles because it isn't a reactive element at all, right? It's a condition of quiet observation.
Yes. The muonic state observes the data before reacting. It absorbs the context before concluding. Most importantly, it creates a buffer of space, a physical and mental breath before taking action.
Wait, if the goal is coherence, and the Dramatons, the Emotrons, and the Egotons are causing all this wreckage in our lives and burning up all this unnecessary energy, Shouldn't we just try to completely eradicate them from our system?
This raises an important question, and it points to a structural bias in how we often approach personal growth. We assume we can just surgically remove the parts of ourselves we don't like.
Like chemically castrating our emotional reactions so we operate as pure, unbothered Authentrons.
Right, but Doc C is very explicit about this trap. Every single human being contains every single one of these particles. You cannot eradicate your egotons any more than you can eradicate your own shadow.
Ah, I see.
The objective is not perfection. And it certainly isn't to become some emotionless, detached robot.
The text makes it clear that the goal is simply awareness. It's about recognizing which particle is currently at the wheel, catching the Dramaton in the act before it turns a misplaced set of keys into a referendum on your ability to function as an adult.
Exactly. But if we acknowledge that we possess all these elements, we have to ask why the reactive ones seem to dominate our default state.
Right. Why are they so loud?
Why do the negative, exhausting particles linger in our system so much longer than the quiet, coherent ones? Doc C addresses this through a concept he calls the Moronic Half-Life.
In literal physics, a half-life measures the time required for a radioactive substance to decay to half of its initial value.
Right.
So when applied to human psychology, the Moronic half-life asks a brilliant question. How long does bad information or a deeply reactive state survive in a human mind before the friction of reality finally destroys it?
And the source provides a fantastic array of examples for this. Consider internet outrage cycles that sustain themselves for weeks based on a completely fabricated or misunderstood quote.
Oh, that happens constantly.
Or the insidious hustle culture myths that convince millions of people they need to wake up at 3 a.m. and take ice baths to have any personal value.
Or the classic I can fix him relationship dynamic that drags on for 7 grueling years despite overwhelming daily evidence to the contrary.
Yes, exactly. Or, perhaps the most cynical example from the text, the industry of gurus selling guaranteed spiritual enlightenment for 3 easy payments of $99.95.
Right. But why do they stick around?
Well, some reactions decay the moment they are exposed to sunlight. But these specific ideas and states survive for decades, passing from person to person, and the text offers a profound explanation for their longevity.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text says these ideas survive, defying all logic and reality because they feed identity instead of truth.
Yes, that distinction feeding identity instead of truth is the absolute core danger of moronic energy.
Because certainty feels emotionally efficient.
It feels incredibly powerful in the moment. When you are absolutely furiously convinced that you are right and everyone else is profoundly wrong, your brain doesn't have to do the heavy lifting of empathy.
Your Egotons just build a fortress around that certainty.
Right, to protect your identity from the decay of reality. Certainty acts as an armor against vulnerability. And when an idea props up your sense of who you are, whether that identity is the eternal victim, the smartest person in the room, or the tireless hustler, your psychological immune system will attack anything that threatens it.
Even if that threat is the objective truth.
Exactly.
So, if certainty is the trap that keeps us locked in this unconscious reactive loop, what does coherence actually demand of you?
Coherence demands the exact conditions that the ego finds terrifying. It requires brutal internal reflection. It requires the humility to observe your own internal weather without immediately acting on it.
That's tough to do.
Very. And most significantly, it requires you to dissolve the structural integrity of your false certainty by uttering a sentence that many reactive particles refuse to say.
I may not know what I'm talking about.
I may not know what I'm talking about. A moron particle literally cannot survive in the atmosphere of that sentence.
An egoton views that sentence as a self-destruct sequence.
Right. Only muonic consciousness has the vastness and the stability to hold the space for not knowing, for admitting the limits of its own perception.
Knowing that our reactive elements will fight to the death to avoid saying those words, how do we practically cultivate this in our messy, everyday lives?
This brings us to the practical application of the text, the Muon Detection Event.
We have mapped out the invisible particles, but to shift our baseline, we need to learn how to spot them operating in the wild. We need to actively look for real-world muon detection events.
We need to train the mind to detect muonic energy interrupting the reactive circuit.
Doc C provides this hilarious, highly relatable scenario that serves as the perfect laboratory for this.
The traffic anecdote.
Yes. Imagine someone driving to work, completely lost in their own thoughts, minding their own business. Suddenly, another car swerves aggressively into their lane, cutting them off and nearly causing an accident.
This is the universal trigger for human reactivity. Let's look at it frame by frame. In a standard unconscious system, this event immediately activates a massive spike of egotons. The initial thought is a structural defense. How dare they disrespect me? They saw me and they chose to diminish my space.
Then, a fraction of a second later, the Dramatons flood the accelerator. The narrative expands from a single bad driver into a cosmic conspiracy. This always happens to me. People in this city are animals. The whole world is selfish and falling apart.
Right, and suddenly the Moron particle hits critical mass, and you find yourself gripping the steering wheel, laying on the horn, and screaming at a piece of metal through your own piece of metal.
We've all been there.
That entire sequence is unconscious momentum. The emotional reaction completely bypassed the prefrontal cortex. The driver is entirely consumed by the reactive density.
But in the scenario of a Muon Detection Event, the circuit gets interrupted. Car swerves in. The Egoton sparks. But instead of laying on the horn, the driver does something radical.
They pause.
They simply pause. They take one slow, deliberate breath. And in that tiny space between the stimulus and the reaction, a different thought emerges. Maybe they're having a hard day.
Or maybe they are rushing to the hospital.
Exactly.
That tiny microscopic pivot is the muon passing cleanly through the nervous system. It disables the reactive triggers not by fighting them, but by introducing a higher quality of awareness. It is a sudden, profound interruption in the momentum of the ego.
So what does this all mean for you? It's like installing an internal smoke detector for your ego.
That's a great way to look at it.
In the past, the whole house had to burn down every time someone cut you off in traffic or sent a passive-aggressive email. Now, the smoke detector just gives a little chirp and you realize, oh, there's just a little smoke. I left the stove on. I can just reach out and turn it off. You have gained awareness of your internal state before the fire spreads.
The Spectrix Institute emphasizes that human beings have actually spent millennia developing technologies to build better internal smoke detectors. The modalities vary wildly, but the underlying physics of what they are trying to achieve are identical.
Like what?
Take breath work, for example. When you practice breath work, you are actively shifting your nervous system from sympathetic fight or flight to parasympathetic rest and digest. You are cultivating a precise awareness of your physiological state.
And meditation works on a similar principle, but applied to the cognitive layer.
Right.
Meditation trains you to observe the observer. It decouples your core identity from the endless stream of dramatons and egotons flashing across your mind,
Allowing you to watch the thoughts without becoming them. Then you have frameworks like neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, which focus on mapping and rewiring the actual neural pathways and behavioral loops those particles travel on.
And practices like Reiki approach it from the angle of establishing and maintaining energetic coherence.
Exactly. The tools look different on the surface, but they are all demanding that you answer one fundamental question in the present moment. Who is operating the system right now?
Is the reactive self at the wheel or the aware self?
Is the moron blindly reacting to the terrain, or is the muon observing the road? It's entirely about catching the unconscious driver before the car hits the wall. To anchor this concept, Doxy concludes the section with a guided reflection.
A way to run a diagnostic on your own internal particle accelerator. Let's actually walk through that diagnostic right now for you, the listener.
Just as long as you aren't currently operating heavy machinery.
Right. As long as you're safe to do so, take a moment to engage with this.
Yeah.
Take one slow, deliberate breath in. Hold it for a microsecond and release it slowly.
Good.
Now look back over the landscape of your past week and ask yourself quietly, where did reactive noise completely dominate my system? Can you pinpoint a specific argument, a moment of acute stress, or a snap judgment where the egotons and dramatons took over the steering wheel?
Hold that memory, and now shift the focus. Where did subtle wisdom try to emerge? Think about the moments where you felt a sudden urge to de-escalate a conflict or a quiet intuition to just walk away from a draining conversation.
What were the exact moments that increased your coherence, and what were the triggers that scattered it into chaos?
It's powerful to think about.
Consider what would fundamentally shift in your daily reality if you simply learned to listen a little more carefully to those quieter particles. What if you gave the muons just a fraction more room to breathe before you formulated your response to the world?
It alters the entire trajectory of how you process reality. Because the ultimate lesson of this framework is that personal growth is not an endpoint where you achieve flawless, unflappable enlightenment.
Right.
Growth is simply expanding the space between the stimulus and the reaction. It is learning to recognize the difference between a moron and a muon before the impact actually occurs.
You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be observant. As we pull all these threads together and wrap up our exploration of Doxy's incredible blueprint, the text leaves us with one final, striking visual that perfectly encapsulates the stakes of this internal work.
Yeah, in the physical world, real muons are moving with such velocity and subtle power that they can pass straight through feet of reinforced concrete without slowing down. They are unstoppable because of their subtlety.
But in the psychological world, moronic energy possesses a terrifying camouflage of its own. Unconscious acceleration, unearned certainty, and reactive ego can pass through entire corporate boardrooms, decade-long marriages, massive political organizations, and endless internet comment sections completely undetected by the people generating it.
It just hums in the background, shaping our collective reality through sheer, unregulated reactive noise. It serves as a stark, urgent warning. You have to actively maintain your coherence, as Doxy brilliantly puts it. You have to beware of the subs, those subatomic subconscious forces that are constantly lobbying to drive your behavior.
So what does this all mean for you as you step back into the chaotic, beautiful collision of your day? I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building directly on this idea of human interaction as an energetic exchange.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If human consciousness really is functioning like a giant, messy particle accelerator, what happens when you intentionally step into a room and surround yourself with other people's muons? If you are actively cultivating your own coherence, can that quiet, aware state actually become contagious? Can the introduction of a single grounded Authentron literally shift the emotional physics of your family dinner table or your office space before a single word is even spoken?
That's a profound thought to leave on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible forces shaping our lives. Keep a close eye on your internal dashboard, watch out for those detonating egotons, and above all else, stay curious.